Chapter 6. Tiffany. Tiffany sighed at the sound of a knock at her door. After today, all she wanted to do was put her hair up and her pajamas on and lounge in front of the TV. But since Holly was at work, she had to deal with whoever this was first. She didn't even bother to check her appearance before opening the door, expecting it to be a solicitor or one of the neighbors asking to borrow an egg. But as soon as she saw the man on the other side, she wished she had. Israel? She blinked at him as one emotion after the other flashed through her mind. Surprise, curiosity, excitement, then apprehension. What was he doing here? And how did he even know where she lived? Tiffany? Her nerves calmed when he seemed just as surprised as she was. I didn't know you lived here. Then what are you doing here? He held up a toolbox and flashed a crooked smile. I'm here to fix the dishwasher. Holly told me it was broken and her roommate... He trailed off as he made the connection. Is me, Tiffany finished with a shake of her head. Her lips lifted in a grin. I can't believe her. I told her I would fix it. Israel shrugged. I guess she got tired of waiting. I don't mean to step on your toes, but since I'm here, he lifted the toolbox again. Maybe I could just take a look. It's kind of what I do. Tiffany bit the inside of her lip. She had wanted to prove she could do the job herself, but she had to admit she was out of her league. YouTube videos could only get her so far, and since Holly had brought the man all the way over here, she might as well let him see if he could fix it. Sure, come on in. Israel smiled softly as he stepped into the living room, and Tiffany couldn't help smiling back. Then her hand flew to her hair. Ugh, it was up in a loose pony at the top of her head, probably looking like a scraggly mess. If she'd known Israel was coming, she would have at least made herself a little more presentable. At least she hadn't changed into her Winnie the Pooh pajamas yet. Still, Holly was going to get an earful when she got home. But as there was nothing Tiffany could do about it now, she led him into the kitchen and pointed to the dishwasher. There it is, the bane of my existence. He chuckled as he set his toolbox down and opened the door. It can't be that bad. Oh, it is, believe me. I thought I fixed it 2 weeks ago, and it was working for a few days, but now the water isn't draining. That thing hates me. He flashed her another smile. I doubt anything could hate you. He'd said the words softly and then immediately turned his attention back to the dishwasher. But Tiffany hadn't missed them, and she felt fingers of heat climb slowly up her neck. She needed to do something. Busy herself so that she wasn't staring at him like a lovesick puppy, or worse. Can I get you a drink or something? He glanced back at her, the twinkle in his eye letting her know that he suspected the real reason for the offer. Sure, I'll take a glass of water, unless you have some agua de Jamaica. She blinked at him. Agua de Jamaica? Okay, my Spanish is a little rusty, but is that water from Jamaica? Israel smiled and shook his head. No, it's a Mexican hibiscus tea, but the English translation is close to what you said. Tiffany was thoroughly confused. So, if it's a Mexican tea, what's the Jamaica part? Israel laughed, and it was a warm, sweet sound that wrapped around her like a comfortable, oversized sweater. The flower used to make the tea is called Flor de Jamaica, but it's really just a hibiscus flower. That's so cool, but since I've never heard of it, I'm sorry to say I don't have any laying around. Is it good? She grabbed a glass from the cabinet and dropped a few ice cubes in before adding the water. I think so. It's a sweeter tea, kind of fruity, but good. My mother used to make it all the time in Mexico. That and tamales. Though his face was buried in the dishwasher as he spoke, Tiffany could hear the love and the wistfulness in his words. She sounds amazing. Do you miss Mexico? She handed him the glass as he paused his work and emerged from the dishwasher. Then she grabbed a glass of water for herself and leaned against the counter. Parts of it I do. I mean, it was my home for the first 15 years, so it's a part of me. But I also saw tragedies in Mexico that I was glad to escape from. He took the glass and took a sip. I'm sorry to hear that. Tiffany had only been to Mexico once, but it had been a week-long trip for her father's business, and they had stayed in the more affluent part of Mexico. She wanted to ask what tragedies he'd seen, but the question felt too personal. For now. Does your mother live in the U.S. now? His eyes dropped to the floor. She did, but she died a few years ago. Tiffany's hand flew to her mouth. She might not have a close relationship with her parents any longer, but they were still around. Oh, Israel, I'm so sorry. You must miss her. I do, especially her cooking. A wistful expression crossed his face. She was an amazing mother. My father had to work, of course, but she stayed home with us. She taught us all her recipes. My sisters were definitely better at cooking than I was, but I still remember how to make a few things. And my sisters and brothers still live here, so I still have family around. What about you? He took another sip before setting the glass on the counter. I'm an only child, sadly, and a disappointment to my parents, but they are still around. She dropped her gaze to her glass and twisted it in her hands. I don't see them often, though. A disappointment? How could you be a disappointment? Tiffany chewed on her lower lip, unsure of how much she should say. After all, she barely knew Israel. But something about him made him extremely easy to talk to. My dad is a lawyer, and he wanted me to take over his practice when he retired. But though I took law classes in college, I had no interest in law. She shrugged, thinking back to the many ways her father had tried to convince her to follow in his footsteps, and the disparaging words from Connor. So I changed my degree to a job that would put me around kids. They didn't agree, but I knew it was the right decision for me. I've always loved kids and want to have a large family of my own one day, so childcare made sense. Oh, good grief. Did she just tell him she wanted to have a large family one day? Would he think she was hinting at him? She certainly hoped not. There weren't many faster ways to send men screaming for the hills than telling them you wanted a large family. However, he wasn't running. Instead, he was smiling at her with that super cute, super charming smile of his, and she noticed that it was slightly lopsided, but that only made her like it more. I want a big family, too. Coming from such a large family, I can't imagine a small one, though I know it works for some people. And I think it's amazing that you're following your own dream. I bet you haven't disappointed your parents as much as you think you have. As he held her gaze, a feeling of warmth flooded Tiffany, and the need to do something to break the intensity of what she was feeling bubbled within her. Thank you, and you might be right about my parents. She took a deep breath as he continued to smile at her and the silence stretched out. I'm going to let you work. I've probably bothered you enough, and I know Holly will give me grief if I keep you from getting the job done. She crossed to the sink and put her glass down before making her way back to the living room. As she did, Israel's soft chuckle reached her ears, and her face flamed. He knew he was having an effect on her, and she wasn't sure how she felt about that. Determined to get her mind off Israel and her traitorous heart that was now beating erratically in her chest, she grabbed a book off the coffee table and curled up on the couch. It did no good, though. Her ears were attuned to every noise coming from the kitchen, and every clank created a desire to turn and see what he was doing. She forced herself not to, but she could not shut down her mind, which continually replayed the conversation and his smile in her head instead of focusing on the words on the page. When she heard what sounded like him closing the dishwasher and standing, she shut her book and returned it to the coffee table. Whatever she'd read would have to be read again, as she had no idea what the words had said. "It should be working now," he said from the entrance to the kitchen. Tiffany jumped at the sound of his voice, even though she'd known he was coming. "Oh, thank you. Holly will be pleased. I am too," she added hurriedly, lest he think she didn't appreciate him. His shy smile spread across his lips again. "I'm glad. Look, I hope you don't think this is too forward, but I'd really like to spend more time with you. Would you be free for dinner this weekend?" A date? He was asking her on a date? Did she even remember how to date? As if on autopilot, she felt her head bob up and down. "I'd like that." "Good." As his smile widened, a twinkle erupted in his eyes. "I'll meet you here at 7. Maybe you can show me around the town. I'm still learning my way around." "I'd be happy to." Again, the words felt as if they were spilling out on their own, without any conscious thought from her. The stare between them seemed to stretch on forever, until the front door opened and Holly entered. "Hi!" The word died in her mouth as she glanced from Tiffany to Israel and back again. "Am I interrupting something?" "No." Israel sent another meaningful look Tiffany's way. "We were just saying goodnight. I finished the job on the dishwasher. Thank you for the opportunity." "You finished already?" Holly's eyes bugged, and her mouth fell open in disbelief. "I need to pay you then." She began fumbling in her purse, but Israel stepped to her and placed a hand on her arm. "No need to tonight. You know where I work, and I'll be back Friday at 7 to pick up Tiffany." He flashed her another grin, as if he enjoyed dropping the bombshell. Her mouth fell open in surprise, but before she could respond, he stepped out of the house and called, "Good night, ladies," before he disappeared into the dusk. Holly shut the door and then turned her full attention on Tiffany. Her left eyebrow was arched high on her forehead. "What did he mean he'd be back Friday at 7 to pick you up? Do you have a date?" Though she could not believe she'd said yes, suddenly the desire to squeal like a schoolgirl welled up within her. "I do. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy." Holly enveloped her in a hug, and the two danced around the living room before stopping when they realized how silly they must look. "Okay, I know it's getting late, but you have got to tell me all about it." "How could I not?" Tiffany was too excited to sleep at the moment anyway. "Come on, I'll tell you everything."